All right, in this video, we are going to take a look at a history of SQL. Now, I want to step you through a number of things just to show you some of the origins of SQL, the stuff we are going to be working with that has been around for a very, very long time. Now, I previously mentioned in 1970, Dr. Codd published a paper about the relational data model. Now, it may have ended there, but Donald Chamberlain and Raymond Boyce started working on SQL, an early version of it, in the early 70s. In 1973, Chamberlain and Boyce started working on what they called SQL, and at this time it was an acronym meaning Structured English Query Language. Now they had to change it to SQL due to a trademark conflict with a UK aircraft company. And you may be wondering, do I say SQL or SQL? Either is fine. A lot of people say both. Some sources say SQL is the proper way. Others say SQL. I've been in the industry forever. People honestly use both. I don't think there is an official right way to say it. And if you pay attention as I go through these lectures, you will hear me go back and forth on SQL and SQL. I think I pretty much use both pronunciations. So don't worry about which one is right. SQL or SQL is okay. Now, this body of work that they were doing on SQL started creating a buzz in the industry. A company saw the promise of the relational database model in the late 1970s. This company was called Relational Software, Inc., and they started working on a SQL-based relational database management system, and they actually sold it to several government agencies. Now, in 1979, Relational Software released its first commercially available relational database management system. And this company later changed its name to Oracle, and you may have heard of Oracle. If you're in technology, I bet you might have. They're absolutely huge. So, shortly on the heels of that 1979 release, IBM released a system called SQL DS, or SQL Data System. That was very short-lived. I honestly don't remember ever hearing much about it. I was doing research for the slide deck, and that was news to me. 1985, IBM released DB2, and that is still IBM's brand of their database management system, or their relational database management system. Now, interestingly enough, 1986, DARPA, a lot of neat stuff has come out of DARPA, if you're a technology nerd. They start working on the Berkeley Postgres project. Now, you'll see this evolve later into what we know as Postgres today. And then in 1987, Microsoft released their first version of SQL Server. So I was surprised by the timeline of that. I didn't realize that SQL Server went back to that old. Then 93, Illustra Information Technologies commercialized the Berkeley Postgres project. So they took the body of work that was being done under DARPA, and they commercialized it, meaning that they created a commercial product out of it and an offering, kind of a fork of the code. And that code was now merged into Informix. And Informix is a very popular database, but to my knowledge, they are closed source and commercial, so you need a license to work with it. And kind of a niche. Informix, back in the 90s and early 2000s, they were a contender going against Oracle, but now they've got a very small market share. Now, in 1994, Postgres evolves into an open source project, and they called it Postgres 95, and they added a lot of features, and it was a significant departure from where they were at, and they're trying to get a larger following. And about the same time, a Swedish company called MySQL AB released MySQL for internal use. So it was for themselves and some internal customers. Now, the original developers included a guy named Michael Monty, I think you say Wideness, and I'm probably butchering his name, David Axmark, and Alan Larson. Pay attention to that Monty name. You're going to hear that again in a little bit. Now, MySQL is actually named after Monty's daughter, Me. I'm not sure how I say that, My or Me. Now, in 1996, Postgres 95 is renamed to Postgres SQL. Now, it's still widely accepted to use just Postgres. I primarily use just Postgres. You'll see in their official documentation, they do refer to the product as Postgres SQL. That is still the air quotes official name, but myself and most people, or many people in the industry, use just Postgres. A little simpler than Postgres SQL. Comes out a little bit easier. Now, Shortly after that, MySQL becomes an open source database under GPL, the GNU public license, which is a very popular license and gives you a lot of freedom. And that really kind of caused MySQL to take off. In 2001, they have over 2 million active installations. And shortly after that, in 2005, Oracle acquired Innobase, and that's the company behind the storage engine of the back end of MySQL. So it made a lot of people in the MySQL community nervous about what Oracle may do with that, but turned out to be much worry about nothing. But MySQL does have a pluggable storage engine, so you can configure it to use different storage backends. Kind of an interesting approach that they have there. But that's still been a very popular option for them. Now, between 2001 and 2006, MySQL grew from 2 million active installations to over 8 million, and the company had 320 employees across 25 countries, so that they were growing rapidly and getting a lot of market share and a lot of buzz in the database marketplace. Both open source and don't forget, even though it's open source and as developers we may look at it as a free database, when you're looking at big companies, they're going to look for commercial support behind it. So that's how companies like MySQL make their money. They still open source a product and they're like, hey, you can download it, work with it, whatever you want. But if you need support and somebody makes sure that it runs right and tunes it, and if something goes wrong at night, we want somebody to call. That's where the commercial support kicks in. In 2008, they were getting very popular, and Sun Microsystems purchases MySQL, and this is an important acquisition. So it does cause some changes downstream, because shortly thereafter, Oracle buys Sun Microsystems, and with it, they get MySQL. And this caused a lot of controversy in the community because Oracle was just dominating the commercial database market, and people were worried that Oracle was going to end the open source of MySQL. And one of the original founders, Monty, remember I told you to remember that name, he actually left Sun Microsystems because he became an employee with the acquisition, and he developed a fork of MySQL called MariaDB. If I remember right, Maria is one of Michael's other daughters. So it seems to have a pattern there naming databases after his daughters. Like I said, this is out of concern about the future of MySQL, and MariaDB API remains 100% compatible with MySQL. So you do get a high degree of compatibility there. So as a developer or as somebody working with it, you should not see any functional differences as you work with that database. And MariaDB is becoming very popular. So if you need to use MySQL or MariaDB, once you have it stood up and running, you really shouldn't see much of a difference. Now, the next thing we need to talk about is ANSI, which it stands for American National Standards Institute. Over time, ANSI has published a series of standards for the SQL language. And these standards have evolved. And this is kind of an area that you'll find a lot of frustration with as somebody that's working with different database vendors, because the relational database support the ANSI, and again, air quotes, support to some degree. They've gotten a lot better, but there's still differences. There's differences in the interpretation of the ANSI standards between vendors. And then there's some features on that database vendor that are just simply different and don't comply with the standard. So it is a standard. It is widely adopted. In theory, you should be able to write ANSI SQL and run it on any database, but there are quirks and gotchas that you will see going between Oracle to Postgres to MySQL. So you will see quirks between the databases, but to give the vendors credit, it is much better where it is today than it was a decade ago. So that is for sure. But there are still little quirks, because all the database vendors have their own flavor SQL, and then they have features that are compliant with ANSI SQL. So that's important to remember as you're moving between database vendors. Now let's take a quick look at the release history. In 1986, the first SQL standard was formalized by ANSI. This was shortly lived. Right on the heels of it, 1989, SQL 89 came out, and this added integrity constraints, and it kind of cleaned up some shortcomings and just kind of really matured that initial release more for the industry. Now, 1992, SQL 92 comes out. This is a major revision, a lot of features that were missing. And what they put in this was a lot stricter compliance standards. So remember I was saying that the interpretations of the standard were largely varying between different database vendors or different database platforms. This was an attempt to tighten that up. And then in 1999, and somewhere between 99 and 92 is when I personally started working with SQL. So I've had a chance to see quite a bit this evolve over time. 99 added regular expressions. That is a very confusing when you first start getting used to way expression of searching for things. Database triggers, which is a cool feature. We'll definitely be seeing those coming up. And that's where you can say if it's something's happening in the database, such as an insert, to do something. So you can run a small programming event on that. And then a lot more features were added in SQL 99. That was a pretty large one and widely popular. 2003, SQL 2003 comes out. This added in XML support and columns with auto-generated values. And this seems like a nice feature. And giving an example, MySQL had it for a long time. Oracle, just until recently, did not have this. So support of the ANSI standard is something that's going to be evolving. If I remember right, auto-generation features were not in Oracle 11, but have been added to Oracle 12. So pretty recent stuff on the technology timeline. 2006, SQL 2006 comes out. More XML support and features specifically for using SQL with XML. So a lot of focus in this time frame about using XML. Now 2008, SQL 2008 comes out. Added instead of triggers is something that we'll definitely be looking at. And the truncate statement. Now this is a very, very dangerous statement. When you truncate a table, it basically says empty that table of all data. It removes everything out of that data from the table. So definitely use that one with care. It's bad, or dangerous, I should say. 2011, SQL 2011 comes out, and this adds a bunch of features for temporal data. So this is kind of an interesting area to be working with. And then finally, in 2016, SQL 2016 comes out. This adds in row pattern matching. You can use regular expressions to match rows, which is kind of an interesting feature. And then JSON features start getting added into the standard. And what's interesting is the industry, the IT industry as a whole, computer industry as a whole, has migrated or started migrating away from XML towards JSON. So several years ago, XML was very popular. Now JSON is very popular, and you can see that the standard has been evolving with it. So like I said, the standard came out, it matured, and then started evolving with the industry and trends in the industry such as XML and JSON. So you can see how this happened. But be aware that ANSI is a standard. We will be looking at ANSI SQL syntax throughout the course, but also be aware that each database platform is going to have different levels of support in their own interpretation of that standard and their own language, so their own features and whatnot that may not be compatible with that standard. So you are going to see differences between the database platforms, even though there is officially a ANSI standard for it.